Hello there, lovely folks of YouTube. Ren here. I'm very excited. It's seed starting day for me. So we're right at the beginning of March. We got about 3 weeks until Ostara, or the spring equinox. Still have the potential for frost outside, but that doesn't mean that we can't start our seeds inside. So I've got my supplies laid out. I'm going to show you what I use and how I do it. First and most important, of course, you need someplace to grow your plants. Now, what I'm not showing you, it's off screen here, I have a little shelf in my south-facing window that's right underneath my houseplants, and on that shelf is a fluorescent light fixture. I put that on a timer. Usually gets about 14 to 16 hours of light a day, and that's bolstered by the light that's coming in from that south-facing window as well. So they get a mix of fluorescent light and natural light. It is not a fancy grow light apparatus or anything of that sort. It's just a regular, I think I got it at the store for like $10 or less. Just a little 12-inch fluorescent fixture with a plant-specific fluorescent bulb in it. You can get plant bulbs that are usually used in like aquariums or terrariums. That's what I use in my light fixture. So that is the place that I will be growing my plants. I have this little bin here. This is a bin that it's been around longer than I've been in my relationship with my husband. It was originally my husband's. I think he got it from his parents. I might have originally been a shelf from like a Rubbermaid shelf system or something like that. I'm not even sure what it was. It was just a random storage bin that he had, and I've now repurposed it for growing my plants in. When it needs retiring, which it inevitably will because you can see it's broken in a few places, I will replace this with just like a regular clear, like Tupperware Rubbermaid storage bin in roughly the same dimensions. The reason I use a bin like this is because I do prefer to bottom water my plants, which means that rather than pouring water in each individual pot, I have all the pots laid out in the bin, and I just pour water into the bin and then let the water kind of seep its way up from the bottom into the soil. So I have my little pots here. These are actually just disposable plastic bathroom cups. I get them, I think it's like 100 cups for about $2. It is the most economic solution that I have found thus far. They are not biodegradable. It is less than ideal. I do try to reuse these as much as I can. You can see here some of the ones from previous years that I'm regrowing those same plants, so I'm reusing these cups as well. And what I do is I take a little kitchen knife, and I just use my knife to just gently cut an X in the bottom of each for drainage, and now I have a pot. Some people do like to use the little Jiffy Pots that are made for seed starting. They're like little pressed peat pots. I don't like those because I prefer to bottom water. The pots tend to soak up all the water and then leave the soil dry, which is not good for the plants. Also, they tend to get moldy if they stay wet for too long. And I just have an issue where sometimes the peat is very nutrient poor and it will suck nutrients away from the plant and into the pot. So I prefer to have just a plastic solution. It's not ideally, of course, by environmental standards, but it's what works for me, and I try to mitigate it by reusing those as much as I can and recycling what I don't reuse. So, let me see. Seed mix. You need some kind of soil to put in these pots. Now, I use this stuff right here. This is Jiffy as well. You need a seed mix that's specifically intended for seed starting. You don't want to use just regular potting soil for this. The reason being is that this is a very sterile mix. It's been heat treated so that it doesn't have any mold or insect spores in it. When plants are very, very small, they tend to be very suspect to a particular type of mold that can cause a symptom called damping off. And what that happens is that the seed will sprout. You'll get like the first 2 days of growth. It'll look great, and then all of a sudden it will just blip and collapse and die. And that is what happens when you don't use sterile seed mix. I've had it happen. There are certain plants that are more susceptible than others. Basil is hugely susceptible to damping off. So I always prefer a sterile seed mix for when they first get started. Once they're established, after about a week or two, then you can move them into a potting soil. But to start off, they do need a sterile soil. I also use a little spray bottle as well. This is what I use for moistening and sort of that first initial watering. The seed mix does tend to be a little bit hydrophobic, meaning it doesn't soak up water very well. So having the spray bottle to really kind of cover as much of the soil surface as you can with moisture really helps. I found that it also helps that if I pre-moisten some of this mix, while it's in the bag, I'll just pour some water into the bag and kind of mix it up. And that helps to make it more accepting to the water when you do plant it. So the seeds itself, you can see this is my super, super organized seed storage system. I keep my seeds in the fridge. So this little Tupperware bin actually stays in the fridge. And I also have, there's a couple in there somewhere, the little silica gel packets that you usually get in like pairs of shoes that usually get thrown in the trash. I add those to here. So that keeps these seeds cold and dry, which is the optimum conditions for long-term storage. Because I keep my seeds in the fridge, they tend to last me a lot longer than just the one season that they're usually grown for. A lot of these seeds I've had for 4 or 5 years, they will still germinate. They may have a lower germination rate, meaning I have to add a few more seeds per pot than I would ordinarily, but I will still get germination from these seeds. So I've already selected this big pile of seeds here that I am planning on starting with. This is a lot, but I may or may not get to all of these today. Some of them can probably hold off until later, but we're going to try and get as many of them as we can. Because I have limited space here, I have planned out, I've basically made a list of all the plants that I'm going to start today and just kind of worked out some numbers of how many of each I'm going to do and made sure that these numbers added up to the amount of pots that I can fit in here, which is about 35, give or take. So I counted mine out and I made sure, most of these I only have 1 or 2, some of them I have 3 that I'm going to start, but made sure that I had the right numbers to fit into my space. Plan ahead. So I have all my little pots here. I'm going to set some of these aside. Most important tool, your Sharpie pen. For all that is holy, you absolutely need to label your pots. Otherwise, you will forget what they are. Every seedling looks pretty much the same. There are a few that might stand out, like usually I can kind of pick out a few of the ones that I grow more often, like I can recognize a tomato. But I won't remember whether it's my cherry tomato or my regular tomato unless I label my pots. So make sure you label your pots. All right, so let's see. Let's just start here. I'm just going to grab this first one here. This one is from J.L. Hudson Seedsman, and this is my black hollyhock. I'll say Rosea variation nigra and nigra. I'm not sure how you pronounce that. It's hard to say that without sounding racist. I'm sorry. But it's a black hollyhock. So these seeds are larger. So you can kind of see that's a good size seed. And the rule of thumb basically is however big the seed is, that's how deep you plant it. So those really teeny tiny seeds, you really just kind of sow them on the surface. This one we can get a little bit deeper. So I'm going to do 3 of these. So I'm going to mark these pots out. I'll move my knife. I'm going to mark these hollyhock. Doesn't have to be perfect, just has to be recognizable as what I planted in there. There we go. I'll get my seed mix here. And just kind of going to scoop up some seed mix. Just a good amount in there. It is messy work. I'm going to get little bits of sort of dirt everywhere, and that's okay. It's clean dirt. If such a thing makes sense. And it does smell amazing. I love the smell of fresh soil and potting soil. They bring back good childhood memories. Now this one, let me see, do I have a year on this one? This is a 2018 seed. So it's been about 2 years, so I will probably want to plant a couple extra of this one. So I'll probably do about 3 in each pot just to be safe. Now if I get all 3 seedlings, I'm actually going to thin them out until there's just one in the pot. And I'm literally just kind of dropping these on top of the soil for now. 1, 2, and 3. Put the extras back. Put this back in my storage bin to know that I've already planted that. So you can kind of see here, there they are just sitting on top of the soil, and I'm just going to kind of tuck them in a little bit with my fingers and then scoop a little bit on top. And there they are. They're planted. Repeat the same with these other two. There we go. Does not have to be filled all the way to the top. It's okay to leave a little bit of space. When these grow to a certain point, they're going to get transplanted either outside directly or into a larger pot for holding. So this is really just sort of a temporary abode for them. And now that I've got them in the soil, I'm just spraying a little bit of that water on top just to moisten them. So the real key is that these need to stay consistently moist in order to sprout. If they dry out, they will not sprout. One of the ways that I do that is very simple. I actually just take plastic wrap and I put plastic wrap over the top of this once I have all my seeds in there. Just put the plastic wrap on top and it will keep all that moisture and humidity in this bin. Once I see the sprouts have mostly sprouted and they've come up to the point where they're kind of getting close to that plastic wrap at the top, then I can remove it and it's okay for them to be out into the air. But in order to keep that moisture in for the first few days until I get some good germination, I do keep this covered over with plastic. And it's basically the same way as like you can buy the commercial seed starting kits that are just basically like a little tray with mini pots and then a little plastic dome that fits over the tray. It's the same principle, just very frugally done. So, and I do continue to bottom water these throughout, you know, whether they have the plastic on top or not. I can just peel back one corner of the plastic and pour water into the corner of the basin and it will spread to all the plants. That's also easier on these little tender shoots. When you're dumping water on them, they can dislodge their newly growing roots. You don't want to do that. I do not give these guys any fertilizer at all until I've seen at least 2 sets of true leaves, okay? Now the difference between a true leaf and the seed leaf or the cotyledon, the seed leaf is basically that first leaf that pops up when you first see the growth. What that is it's actually, in dicots, it's the 2 halves of the seed where the food for the growth has been stored. So the little stem will pop up with the root coming down below it, and then it has those little seed leaves. And then from the center of where those seed leaves are, the rest of the stem with the true leaves will pop up. Seed leaves tend to look like the seed itself. If you've ever planted beans and you see that first little sprout that looks like the 2 halves of the bean, that's the seed leaf, that's the cotyledons. The true leaves tend to look very different, and they look like whatever the plant looks like, just in miniature. So, like for example, when you plant tomatoes, you might see tomatoes have a little round seed, and they'll put out these little teeny round seed leaves, and then you'll see a leaf, little teeny tomato leaf, like a recognizable tomato leaf will come out. That's the true leaf. So you want to make sure before you fertilize, you see at least 2 sets of those true leaves, the leaves that look like the plant, not the little seed leaves. Because these are being grown indoors, they do tend to be a little bit weaker than what you would see growing outdoors, simply because they're not exerted to the same amount of stress that you would have outdoors. They don't have rain, they don't have wind, they don't have things going past them and bugs and whatnot. They have advantages because they're not exposed to that stress. They're more likely to grow and thrive and get to the point where they're no longer little babies and are able to fend for themselves. However, you can't just plant these outside as they are. They need to be strengthened before they can go outside. So one of the things that I do very early on is you want to make sure that there's some motion in these plants, because that motion of the stems kind of going back and forth in different directions will help to strengthen the plant. It induces the plant to create more lignin, which is the sort of skeletal chemical structures that you have in the stems. Some people will do this simply by getting an oscillating fan, and they'll just have the oscillating fan blowing on the plants, and the plants get blown back and forth by that. I prefer a more hands-on approach and a lower electricity approach. We're just once or twice a day, once I've taken the plastic off of these guys, I'll just come by and I'll just very gently just run my hands through the plants, just back and forth, just very gently kind of brushing them back and forth. That helps to stimulate that lignin production while also kind of building that bond between me and the plant. Now, when they're starting to get big to the point where they need to move out of this, that's when I start the hardening off process. Hardening off is sort of slowly introducing them to the environment in which they're going to be living their life. On a warm day, I will take these guys out, just bin and all, just move the whole bin outside into an area where they get kind of like dappled shade, so like half sun, half shade, and a little bit of wind exposure, just for about an hour or so, not very long. And you're just slowly increasing the time in which they're exposed outside. And for some of these plants, like if there's more shade plants, then I will leave them in that dappled shade. If they're sun plants, I might start moving them into a more full sun area instead of a dappled shade area. I use my deck for this. My shade area is actually underneath the banister of my deck. The little slats for the fencing on my deck creates a perfect dappled shade because it just creates lines of sun and shade that will move as the sun moves. Whereas the full sun area I have is right on the bench of my deck because that is just blaring down in the sun. You do need to be careful when you put these outside. They will dry out a lot faster, so I always make sure that I'm giving them an extra boost of water before I put them outside. And then usually it's about maybe about a week process, just slowly increasing the amount of outside time they have until they're spending the majority of the day outside. Once they get to that point where they're spending the majority of the day outside, I usually put them into a larger pot with potting soil around it and move them into my cold frame to kind of give them that last bit of outdoor exposure while still in a sheltered, controlled environment. Because with the cold frame, I can open and close the door on it. If it gets too cold outside, I can close the door to keep that ambient heat in, make it like a greenhouse. Whereas when it's warm, I can open it up in order to get them that fresh air that they need in order to build up their strength. So, but basically that's how I do it. So I've got, well, let me see. I've got about 32 more of these to plant. I'm not going to bore you with all of it, but I can tell you what I have this year that I'm really excited about. Let me see. Some of the new ones, I'm planting feverfew this year, so that's new. I am planting henbane. I grew that last year, but I wasn't very successful with it. I put it in the ground and it didn't like it there, so I'm going to try growing it in a pot this year, and we'll see if we have better luck with that. I have some portulaca, or moss rose. This is actually a new one for me. See, here's my little seeds there. It's a very pretty little flower. That's actually going to go in my front yard because I have a very dry, rocky place that should love, and I haven't been able to grow anything else there. Aconitum, monk's hood or wolfbane. I've tried to grow that for a few years now, and I have not gotten any germination yet. I have some that's cold stratifying outside. I'm going to try and start some inside. We'll just see what happens. Maybe this year will be my lucky year. That happens sometimes, you know. Sometimes I try to grow stuff from seed and it just doesn't work. Sometimes it just takes several years of trying before I finally hit the right combination. I know that's what happened with my Angelica. It took me about almost 5 years to successfully grow Angelica from seed, and now I have 2 that are looking wonderful. So, and they're actually starting to pop up now outside. So, but yeah, it's not an exact science. Even someone like me, I'm fairly experienced at it, but I still sometimes completely boff it. And there's always next year. So don't be too hard on yourself. If this doesn't work out, you know, if you really try and start stuff from seed and it doesn't work out, don't be hard on yourself, but don't give up either. Okay, just keep trying. It will click eventually, I promise. So anyway, I hope that that answered some questions. And of course, if you have any other questions, you're more than welcome to comment, and I'll do my best to answer. And of course, when I get some little sprouts and everything, I'll give you a little update as I bring these guys out to harden off once they sprouted. And some of these guys will then end up going out and making room for my next batch of seeds, which will be my actual vegetable garden seeds, the tomatoes and like. So I will see you again in the next video, and keep watching.